The final draft of Helen's will must be finished tonight. She's quickly growing weaker. She has bestowed upon me the duty to make sure her final wishes are known to all. She has always been a woman of her word, and they must be formally acknowledged.
I, Helen Purcell, of the city of Zanesville, county of Muskingum, state of Ohio, do make and publish this, my last will and testament.
I'm not often shaken by the passing of a patient, but I consider Helen to be a dear friend. What a wonderful woman. I only wish I had known her during her younger years.
The story of Helen Purcell is a living testament to commitment and dedication. A lesson in the power of a single person to change the world for the better. On November 24th, 1824, Joseph and Susan Purcell gave birth to a baby girl near Harpers Ferry, Virginia. The youngest of several children, Helen Purcell was a very plain-looking girl. Her father was a riverboat captain. At age 3, Helen and her family traveled westward searching for a better life. The trip was quite long and treacherous, but was made easier with the construction of the then-new National Road.
At this period of time, preferred means of transportation was by water. But if there weren't a navigable river or a canal established going to where people wanted to go, they had to use overland travel. And the National Road was by far and away the best overland road existing in America at that time. So more than likely, they would have used the National Road from northern Virginia, could have followed it all the way to Zanesville, Ohio by the late 1820s.
The Purcells ultimately chose to settle in the already prosperous town of Zanesville, Ohio. Not long after, her father changed occupations and entered the riverfront commerce, piloting coal barges up and down the river.
When they got to Zanesville, Zanesville was a very prosperous city. After all, they had been manufacturing glass and soap here from 1811. The steamboats came up from Marietta that had come all the way from New Orleans by 1811. And this was a bustling, prosperous town.
Helen's childhood was much different than other children her age. For reasons not fully understood, Helen was a weak child or invalid.
What they called a weak child, it might be a child that suffered from consumption, which was the common disease of malnutrition at the time. Very, very common. It's tuberculosis.
Though no pictures of Helen exist, it is known she suffered from a deformity to her right eye, which resulted in exceptionally poor vision. Because of this setback, Helen was unable to attend school until the age of 15.
They might have restricted her unduly and told the parents not to allow her to participate in things that she well could have. That persisted on for many years after that, in which children were unduly restricted in what things that they could participate in and do when they would have been perfectly well to do it.
Helen's contact with the community was very limited. Much of what she knew of the world came from looking out the window of her bedroom and what news her family shared with her. When she was not in bed, Helen offered assistance around the house, and her mother taught her to sew.
You must remember that Helen Purcell was, from her health descriptions, she would have been considered by her family unmarriageable. She was from the time she was simply a teenager, a spinster. And this meant that spinsters had to find, the family had to provide them a way to support themselves. And the most common way was to be a seamstress.
Though Helen had few friends outside her family, there was one particular lady Helen admired greatly.
Across the street from the Purcell home was the home of the Van Horns, who are quite a well-to-do, socially prominent family. Miss Sarah Van Horn was famous for taking food baskets and clothing parcels to people in the community. She and Mrs. Henry Stanberry, who were sort of the social leaders of Zanesville at that time, were engaged in these works. And I think that Helen Purcell watching Sarah Van Horn, saw what we would consider a very good example. And it was quite important to her as an inspiration.
Helen's teens and 20s were spent not only caring for her aging parents, but also attending school and participating in functions at her local church.
Purcells belonged to the Methodist Church. They would have been having Bible readings outside their church organization. We know from later records that Helen Purcell, despite her vision problem, consumed the Bible. Supposedly she read it through 32 times. The social life available there is really tied with church. There would have been church socials, box suppers. There would have been especially singing societies. They're very popular, where people would gather like in the living room of this home, and a piano would be played and they would sing all the popular songs of the time. And this was the high point.
At the age of 30, Helen's life dramatically changed after the death of her most treasured sister, Virginia. The pain of her loss was too great to handle, so Helen packed her few belongings and moved to Dayton. Though little is known of her time in Dayton, it is thought that those were very happy years.
She'd have been a dressmaker. And the normal way dressmakers functioned is that someone down the street or somebody who knew somebody needed new clothing for school, and they needed them for a trip. And so the seamstress worked out. What that meant is she went to somebody's home and she worked 8 to 10 hours a day for a set amount of money plus meals.
Helen spent 12 years living in Dayton, Ohio. In 1866, Helen made the difficult decision to move back to Zanesville to care for her ill brother, America.
When the Civil War was over, Helen was in Dayton, but her brother, America, had become invalid, and he asked her to come home. I think this must have been a wrenching part of her life. She had been raised as the invalid. She had been the unmarriageable daughter. And finally, in her middle age, she broke off and she went to Dayton and she established herself as an independent person. And then, as happens so often with single women, there's a family need, and she has to come home.
In the years that followed, Helen spent most of her time assisting both the children and the needy in Zanesville.
The women of South Street Church, along with Helen, I think, joined together to develop the Sabbath school so that religion could be provided along with education, and to provide children that were less fortunate the opportunity to have some self-respect and to have an opportunity to grow as she was given in her later years.